Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be showing you how I painted this beautiful summer poppy field. Trying to keep it nice and loose but nice and fresh as well. I found a photograph that inspired me on Pixabay. I found the colours to be a little bit bright and oversaturated in the photograph, so I've used my artistic licence to simplify the scene quite a bit. Pause the video here if you'd like to have a look at my simple sketch and see where I've used masking fluid to mask out some shapes to represent or suggest the flowers in the foreground. And of course, this wouldn't be one of my videos without me promoting my book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's available from all good bookstores and you can find it online. And I've left a couple of links in the description below if you're interested in taking a look. My paper today is Milford cold press watercolour paper, 11 inches by 15 inches or 28 by 38 centimetres. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape and my board's at an angle of about 20 to 30 degrees. I'm wetting the sky all over and I'm also going to wet the land. You can see how I'm following the directionality of the landscape with my brush strokes. This will help me when I apply paint to get the paint representing what I want it to. So more organic shapes for the sky, but nice sort of fairly straight lines following the lines of perspective in the land to give me a head start on building up my land. This is cobalt blue and you can see that I'm working around the white of the paper to leave some of the paper showing through because it's my lightest light and it's really important to preserve that for the clouds if you want a nice sort of simple sky. Because the paper's wet, everything is softly diffusing, and if I want even more softness, I can use a crumpled up piece of tissue or kitchen paper and just dab off a little bit of the excess blue. Using the same brush, which is my 1.5 inch Princeton Aqua Elite Modeler brush, I'm adding some lemon yellow and adding a little bit more sap green into it. This is a nice rich value. And I'm adding it across the land so that the distance looks as if it's much brighter with the sun hitting it. And just varying up the greens. I've now added a little bit of burnt sienna to my green to add a more earthy sort of hue to it. And so I've got all these different shades of green on my palette which I can dip into to create this kind of suggested landscape. Just following the direction of the path, roughly placing that in, try not to get too bogged down with detail, just trusting the process that the brush strokes, as they soften and diffuse, will begin to come together into this landscape. Now this is Peroline green, really rich, only a tiny bit of water added to this. I'm putting in that ivy-clad distant tree. I've added some sap green here and there again to add a little bit of variety to the greens. Then I'll just put a few smaller trees and bushes going off into the distance along that horizon line. And then I can use what's left of this darker green to work around the masked out flowers. And of course, by creating a stronger contrast and darker value around the flowers, that means when I come to paint them with rich colour, they'll stand out even more. I'm putting a little bit more detail in the foreground here, now using a fan brush and pulling up sort of these brush strokes that just kind of indicate or suggest the grasses or the crop growing in the field. Then using a 3/4 inch flat brush, just clean and damp, to just run along the horizon line and clean that up. Maybe put a few more bits of that darker green there to make this the right side, make the trees in the distance a little bit taller than those on the left. And now I'm just going to bring out a few sort of straggly branches from this heavy summer canopy of tree that's really heavily in leaf, with lots of ivy growing all over the trunk so you can't see it. But I'm just going to bring a few branches out from that loose shape just to add a little bit of interest. This is very light value burnt sienna, just to put in that pale summer sort of earthy path, and just suggest that on either side of the grassy patch that grows down the middle of these two earthy parts of the path. And then while the foreground is still damp, I'm using my palette knife again to scrape through the paint, just to further suggest or increase the suggestion of the crop growing tall and straight around the flowers that I'll paint in later. Just keeping these marks in the foreground, maybe a few stretching back a little bit further and some on the other side, but just keeping this really, really simple. Just using the tips of the flat brush just to drag a little bit of paint around where it's still damp, again just to suggest distant fields. I've laid the board flat, and this is ordinary fine ground table salt. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this only around the masked flowers into that darker paint, which is almost dry, and I'm hoping that I'll get some really subtle suggestions of leaves and flowers just to build up the texture in the foreground. I now need to leave it to dry completely. And here's the dry painting. It's just about done, or the main background is. It's now time to turn my attention to the flowers. I'm going to use a clean damp brush and brush off any remaining salt crystals that haven't dissolved into the paint. And now I'm going to remove the masking fluid. I'm using an adhesive remover, or otherwise known as a rubber cement pickup. And this works really well to remove the masking fluid, but you can of course use a clean dry finger to rub it off, or you can use the tacky side of a piece of masking tape. It's always advisable to check your paper first and try the masking fluid out on it to make sure that it's not going to damage the paper when you remove it. Some cheap papers will tear when you try to remove it, which can be frustrating, so test your paper first if you're not sure. If you look closely at the marks that were left and protected by the masking fluid, I've got some larger marks, which will be my poppies, and smaller, almost sort of stippled marks. Those I'm going to leave just to give the impression of like little white flowers, maybe daisies, that sort of thing, in and amongst the poppies. I'm using a size 2 round brush and dampening the poppies with clean water, and then using pyrrole red, which is a nice rich red, and dabbing that into the dampened area, and it spreads out nicely to give me my beautiful poppies. So I'm allowing the context of this scene to suggest the poppies rather than overtly painting poppy shapes. I can use a tissue to dab off any areas that look a little bit too dark at this stage, and I'm going to build this up in a couple of layers. So I work across my whole patch of poppies, and then when they're all painted I can just darken up some of the areas to show where there are several poppies next to one another, or one behind the other, etc., etc. So now that my poppies are almost done, there's just one finishing touch, and I'm going to use Perylene Violet and the tip of my brush and just touch a sort of dark purpley centre into a few of the larger poppy shapes, just to suggest the darker centres of these beautiful flowers. And that's the finished painting. So now for one of my favourite parts, which is to remove the tape and see how it looks with its clean white border. Tidies things up and allows you to see it with fresh eyes. and I'm really happy with this. I love how the poppies are suggested here, and if you want to see in more detail how I created the flowers, then there's an exclusive Patreon Meadow Flower Masterclass. Just follow the link below if you're interested in that, and maybe sign up for a month or two and see what you think of Patreon. There are hundreds of exclusive videos and lessons over there, and you can share your work over there with other members in our Patreon Art Studio community chat group. Well, many thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, then please click on the thumbs up button, and why not consider subscribing if you haven't already, because it really helps with our reach. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.